should ask him. We shouldn't table this. There's a lot
Troy?
of stuff, but,
No, please do.
well, he might have an answer. He said, I might be able
Yeah.
Oh, he's going to get that microphone.
30 seconds, please, Dave. Well, we have a little bit of time. Good evening, and welcome to the February 11th, 2020 Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District meeting. Our first order of business, would you please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Kurt. So our next item on the agenda is the public comment, and since we do have folks in the audience, I'm going to see if there is anybody that would like to speak at the public comment period. Seeing none, we're going to move on to the next item to approve the agenda. I'm going to ask if any of my colleagues, any changes to the agenda. Gents, seeing none. Diane, nothing from you. I would then entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Bruce, are you an aye? It carries 5-0. Thank you. Fred. So the next item on the agenda is Section 4, Other Old New Business, and we have our standing projects and programs update. Turn it over to the ladies. Are you ready to go? Okay.
Okay, the level of Prior Lake is at approximately 902.55. I say approximately because the battery appears to have died about a week ago, but It has been staying relatively steady anyways, so it's just barely flowing over the weir, so I think it's gonna stay level for a while here unless we get some significant snow or rain. The monitoring minute this month is going to focus on the level of Prior Lake and flow from 2019. So this is a hydrograph of the level of Prior Lake. If you see that flat line, that's the weir. So anytime that the line is above that is when the water is flowing. And so I'll describe this better. But when you're looking at this, the white is just kind of the normal operation where the water is flowing over the weir, but the low flow gate is closed, which is what we consider the normal position. The green is where the low flow gate was open. So the outlet was flowing, but the low flow gate was open, allowing additional water to flow out through the pipe. So when you look at this, there's red and yellow. The red is when we physically closed the whole main gate so that no water was leaving the lake because we were preparing for some bank erosion projects in the outlet channel. And so we physically closed that for a short time. And then the yellow is the only time that the outlet structure wasn't flowing just due to low water. So just some kind of facts about the year. The max elevation in 2019 reached 903.93. And I'm going to compare a little bit to 2014. If you remember, or maybe you've heard that 2019 actually had the most precipitation in recorded history. So comparing to 2014 when we had the big flood, I just thought it might be an interesting comparison for a few of these facts. So in 2019, the max elevation reached 903.93, which was about 2.2 feet lower than 2014. And the no wake was we had a no wake in the end of April for about a week as compared to 2014 when we had about 2 months of a no wake. And also the precipitation in 2019, depending on where you were in the watershed, ranged between 41 and 43 inches. And in 2014, it was about 36 inches. So there's quite a bit of difference in the amount of precip, but it was all due to when the rain fell. So you can kind of keep that in mind when we're talking about this, about how important it is when the rain falls versus how much rain falls. Maybe not surprisingly, after learning that we had the most rain in 2019, we also had the most discharge leaving the outlet structure in our recorded history of monitoring the flow leaving Prior Lake. And we had about twice as much discharge leave Prior Lake in 2019 versus the 2014 flood. That's mostly due to the amount of time that the structure was flowing. In 2019, it was flowing for about 11 months versus 4.5 months in 2014. And the low flow gate in 2019 was operating for more than half the year. And usually we only open that in March and April just to create some more storage in the lake for springtime flooding, but because of all the rain, we did keep it open way longer than any other year. So when you do the calculations on how much volume of water left the lake, it calculates to an estimated 10.4 feet of vertical volume on the lake. So in theory, if like all the rain fell on one day, when the lake was at its highest elevation, it could have reached an elevation of 914, and that's it would never happen that way, but that's just to somehow imagine how much water actually left through the outlet structure. So yeah, I would like to take credit for operating the low flow gate superbly, and that's why we didn't have any flooding in 2019, but it was mostly due to Mother Nature and when the rain fell. So we really did luck out this last year. So I guess that is the summary of what I have on that. Do we have any questions on that before we move on?
That looks great, Jamie. I will in just a minute, Bruce, thank you. But this looks great. Jamie, is this, and the information you shared with us, is that going up on the website?
So this information is in the 2019 Outlet Channel annual report. So I am in the process of finishing that. It'll be on the website next week.
Okay, great.
In the Outlet Channel section, there's some reports there. So you can find all this information there.
There's some good stuff in there. Bruce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jamie, to summarize this, we had a record rainfall event throughout the year in 2019, but it was spread out throughout the whole year. So our outlet channel was able to handle it.
Right.
Versus 2014, where we had a concentrated period of time with a lot of rainfall. And
Correct.
that's why we had the elevation. So I think that's important for people to see and realize.
Yeah, 2014 we had, it was a total of 36 inches over the whole year, and 11 inches of those were within a month, or 11 to 13 inches within June. So it was just all at one time. Yep.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any questions? Charlie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jamie, do you know, in the first 3 months, the precipitation blue lines, is that snowfall inches, or is that converted to what it would be if it was rain?
That's the melted precipitation.
melted.
So we do take the snow and melt it. Yep.
Okay, thank you. I was trying to see a correlation, and I know there's a lot of factors involved here, but at what amount of precipitation does it have a discernible impact on the lake level, where you see, okay, it rained this much and all of a sudden now we start spiking, and it looks like almost a half an inch of rain before we really see any sort of impact on the lake itself. And I just think that's interesting anecdotal evidence as a person who lives around town. Hey, we got an inch of rain last night. Well, we can expect the lake to go up. Or, hey, we got a quarter inch of rain, so, the lake won't even see any sort of bounce. I know it's more complicated than that, but that was something that this graph could allow somebody to, figure
Right,
out
yeah.
just by looking at it. I thought that's pretty neat.
The other main factor that we can't see in this is the amount of flow coming in from Spring Lake. So if it was really dry, a really dry year, Spring Lake might not be outletting at all into Prior Lake. So then if it rained a half inch, it would barely rise more than a half inch.
Yeah, and then the other takeaway is right there in mid-March, boy, all that water releasing from the upper watershed with, frost coming out and snow melting, any sort of rain event at that same time, bang, that's where we get nailed for sure. Because you do another down the stream in the middle of summer, you have a 1 inch rain event. It doesn't anywhere near affect the lake level as it does if that same rain event happened in March.
Right, and as we've heard, the risk of flooding this spring is really high because of kind of the same scenario. Not only is there's a decent amount of snowpack, but the soil itself is completely saturated. So any sort of rain that we get in the spring is just going to run straight off into the stream. So that's kind of the risk. Why they keep talking about these risks, and we're getting warnings in our emails, and everybody should buy flood insurance, and so yeah, that's part of it.
Jamie, I'm going to ask you to maybe to dovetail on what Charlie was doing, but there was one other item that I think might be worthy to or add into some of the questions Charlie was asking. There's also a lag time, because again, everything that hits on the upper watershed is coming down through into the lakes. But I remember really looking at 2014 data at one point. There's a lag time upon which the water, and again, whether it's full or not, but what is that sort of lag time that everything coming on the upper watershed is going to work its way and find its way into the lake, so that the full effect of a 6-inch rain, we don't see it until 4 or 5 days later?
I'm thinking, Carl, if you want
Do
to
you
jump in, is
remember?
it
I mean,
seven-
it's some
7
days
days?
later, right?
I'm thinking 7 days, but I'd have to double check.
Mr. Chair, it could be as much as 10 days
Yeah.
from the headwaters of Sutton and moving through all that.
Okay. Thanks. Well, I'm looking forward to read the report. Anybody else have anything for Jamie? No. Thanks, Jamie. Good stuff.
So to follow up on the flooding risks, again, because of the high precipitation and last year and the soil being saturated and all that, we will be opening the low flow gate as soon as possible. The permit allows us to open it March 1st, and we'll be opening it probably a few days after that because of the fish houses on the lake. We don't want to open it and cause a gap between the ice and the water, which can cause some safety concerns. So we have to double check if it was March 2nd or March 4th where the fish houses have to get off the lake. But we will be opening that as soon as possible, and we will be meeting also with the county and the city of Prior Lake and to discuss the flood response policy and just prepare just in case. Hopefully not, but just be prepared. A quick update on the Spring Lake alum treatment. We are prepared to take sediment cores next week. We were going to do it this week, but because of the cold, we're going to wait till next week. And when so what we're going to do with those sediment cores is we analyze that so that we know how much alum to dose Spring Lake with in order for it to be effective. So those results will come in on April 1st, and then we'll be sending out bids for the alum contractor on the 3rd and getting those results back by the 10th, if not sooner. And the plan is to do an alum treatment in May on Spring Lake. There are some other factors that we will be considering which could move it to a fall alum treatment, but right now we're going to go ahead with this timeline. And Diane is going to talk about the upper Prior alum treatment.
So managers know that we were notified on January 22nd that we received a Clean Water Fund grant, programs and project, to get alum treatment in Upper Prior, and this was something we're really excited about, and it would be for our first of 2 doses. And so we have a work plan that has to be completed and into Bowser by the 15th of April, and then the execution of the contract is due about the 15th of May. We're not quite sure when the funds will be available at this point, so we can't say for sure when we'd like to have the alum treatment for Upper Prior. However, we are going to be sending out RFPs to contractors to do either a spring or a fall alum treatment in Upper Prior, possibly with or separately from the Spring Lake alum treatment.
Questions? How much was that grant for, Diane? I'm not sure the public knows that yet. I was going to start clapping, and I decided to let you finish.
It's $449,000.
Significant amount of dollars. Nicely done.
Thank you.
So, congrats. Yeah, Bruce?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question on the spring. I noticed you said like April 3rd going out for bids and April 10th opening. I know it's a public improvement process. Is that the right, could you double check that timeline on public bidding requirements? A week seems pretty short. And I think Carl would probably be able to answer that question more than anybody, but.
I will double check that. I wasn't completely confident about that. I did ask one of the alum contractors how long they needed, and they did say a week would be okay for them, but they also mentioned that I might want to check into
Yeah.
if there's some
Just
rules.
check the
about
public bidding requirements. Thank you.
So Jamie, I might ask you just a clarification, just because I'd like to revisit it, because I know it was an item at the board retreat that we're going to do a little report on about a desire to open that low flow gate in advance, knowing what we've been hearing on the reports on how full things are and that we might be at risk for flooding if we see some of that continued pattern of heavy early spring falls. Can you clarify again why or just state again why it is we don't want to open that low flow gate prior to the houses moving off? Can you tell us what's happening on the lake with both the ice and the water, and what happens and why there's a safety risk? Because I think that's worth noting.
So this has kind of been brought to our attention the past couple of years because we hadn't really been opening the low flow gate quite this early. But from from what I understand is if we open the low flow gate, that water in between the bottom of the ice and the top of the water, there becomes this air pocket, and then I think there's a concern of the fish houses or the trucks, probably more likely when they're going out to get their fish houses, that it would fall down. But I would love to pass it off to somebody else that actually knows. But that's what the safety, the police department actually told us, that they wanted us to inform them when we're going to be opening it for that reason. So they were the ones that alerted us to that concern, which I'm not real familiar with.
Okay, thanks. Carl, I mean, I think I know, but Carl, what's the...
Yeah, just to add on to what Jamie said, my understanding is it's not as if the entire lake ice shelf is staying suspended. What happens is the predominant portion of it moves down with the water level, but the edge contact is holding it up on the edges, and so you're getting lowering and cracking of the ice on the edges, which then is a little bit mobile. So if you still got vehicles that are trying to go back and forth, it's the compromising of the perimeter that is the concern. It's not as if once you get out to the main part of the lake, that's not an issue. You just got to get there, and that perimeter gets compromised.
Gotcha, thanks. That helps. Thank you. Next.
All right, as you all know, we were hoping to get a carp stain in last week. And when we're doing the carp stain, we're always looking for those 5 magical things, right? We need the ice to be thick enough. We need the carp to be grouped up in the right location for a seine. We need the commercial fishermen ready with their nets. We need a market, and we need the air temperature to be okay so that the native fish survive as we're sorting through them. So we had all of those things on Saturday. And actually, if you want to go forward a couple slides. And a picture says 1,000 words, but a video says 1,000,000. So I'm going to play this short video of what we did last Saturday. People always ask how this is done, so I just wanted to create a video so people could feel like they were really there. It's kind of crazy how they do this with a chainsaw, and it goes really fast. So the seine net's about like a half mile long, so it's really long as they're stretching this underneath the ice.
Maggie, so there's different holes for pulling the carp out and for putting the net in? And I never knew that.
And this part always makes me nervous. Just watch Joe Schramm. He's the guy walking across. So there was a lot of holes they had to drill to first find the net, and then once they found the net, they had to go back and forth and try to figure out where the snag was. It just took a lot of time and a lot of manpower.
Maggie, what was it snagging on?
Oh yeah, I'll cover that in a second. Okay, so when we were out there, they kept on pulling up the net, and you see this big plume of mud come up, and we're like, oh, we're snagging on mud. Because like if you hit a low spot in the lake, the seine weight line, so like there's a floater on the top and then there's weights on the bottom, they'll kind of get sucked underneath the mud, and sometimes the mud is so thick and so heavy with clay that it just pulls it and holds it there. So they kept on pulling it up, and we just kept on finding mud. And they did this like 3-4 times, hitting these snags, and every time you pull the seine net in, it's in a different location, and you got to go find it again. So it was just this huge process. Tony Havranek, the WSB scientist, said it was the longest seine day he's ever had. Like it was a really long time. But what ended up happening is they came back on Sunday. So this is a rarity for commercial fishermen. They left the seine net underneath the ice overnight because they were really trying to push it. They can't technically work after hours. It's part of the rules with being a commercial fisherman. You can't work in the evenings. So yes, they came back on Sunday morning to take it out, and they found that somebody had thrown in a Christmas tree with tied cinder blocks to it to weight it down. Typically people do that for bass habitat. You see it a lot in like bass fishing lakes where they have tournaments and stuff. So it's not uncommon. It was just a surprise because we had just been in that exact location 3 years ago and it was clear. So somebody had thrown it in there in the last 3 years. The other problem that they found when they went to the other side, to the west side to pull it out, they found a tear in the top of the net. And that was interesting. So what that means is that somebody was out there marking the ice spot where they had a really good fishing spot, and they didn't want to forget where it was. So they must have stuck something in the ice, and then it ended up sinking down below the ice because the whole top of the net was shredded, not the bottom where you usually see snags. So somewhere in that seine haul area, somebody has something sticking through that ice, whether it's a stick or a pole or something that just shredded the net on the top. So we had two huge issues. So even if we hadn't snagged on the east side, when we pulled it through, there would have been a big hole on the west side, and the carp would have swam out anyway. So like this was just one of those crazy things. We had the perfect haul. We had a really good aggregation of carp, and it was just a complete shame. I think everybody was pretty disappointed, but you learn and you bounce back quickly because we have to if we want to get these carp. So the fishermen, after we talked to them, both Riedemann and Geyer, they want to wait until the spring so that they can make sure that those obstructions aren't going to be a problem. Because even if they don't find them in the springtime, if it's open water, you can just pull up over them. But when something's stuck underneath the ice, it just takes you forever to find it. So you can't work as quickly. The reason that we like to do it in the winter, though, is because they aggregate in the winter. So they cluster real tight in the wintertime, and it's always such a perfect time. But now that we have these underwater speakers, and we're going to start using this unified approach to herd the fish into the areas, which will be very, hopefully, successful in open water, we're going to be trying that this spring. But yeah, it was a huge disappointment. But if you want to click to the next slide. There we go. So our goal right now for Spring Lake is to wait into the open water until we can work with those obstructions a little bit better, try the unified technique. And also for Spring Lake, we're doing the baited box traps with the volunteers this spring. We're going to do it over by that wetland area, kind of by the Spring Lake Ridge development. And we're going to be using a specialized trap that WSB and Jeff Anderson has developed to try to capture some of those carp that are going upstream to spawn. So it doesn't end here. We're going to keep working on Spring Lake. But right now, because it's winter time and we want to get a good haul in, we're focused completely right now on Upper Pryor. So we're going to be working with the fishermen on Upper Pryor Lake to get those out. We did move them out of that rocky area, but now they're in a different area that we need to work with them a little bit. But again, on Upper Pryor, it's not just the winter seine. We're also going to go after them in Mud Bay again, like we did last spring. And then those electrofishing removals in Arctic Lake Outlet were really successful, so we're going to do that again. But if you go to the next slide, here's where they are in Upper Pryor. So Mary Newman from WSB was just out there yesterday just tracking the carp. And that's where they're at. They're starting to cluster again. So they used to be over by 825 up in the upper right-hand corner. And now they've all started to kind of cluster closer to that seine haul that we had the very first time, I think it was 2016, that very first seine haul that we had on Upper Pryor. That was the one where we just had like 3,000 carp we took out. But if they can move a little bit over there, can I borrow that mouse? So the problem with this area, the reason that we can't seine it is because this line right here is 30 feet deep. And the seine net is about 20 feet deep. So if we put the line in there, it's not going to be very successful. So we need to move them. We could try to do it over here, but there's a little bit of rocks. So if we can move them this way and get them underneath the ice right over here, that would be perfect. But what WSB is hoping for, because they've been talking to Redeman about it already, is that if they go back to the rocky area, we know exactly the direction they took off in when we tried using the speakers last week or 2 weeks ago. So we know where to put the block net. So we'll likely put a block net here if they go that way. And then we have 4 speakers between the 2 entities. So we're going to spook them out of the bay again and then push them into our preferred haul area where the commercial fishermen will set the net kind of like this and then just wrap it around them when we scare them that way. So that's what we're trying to work with the commercial fishermen on right now. I think if we do end up doing that area by Naughty Or, it's going to be Jeff Redeman we're going to work with. And so we're just going to try our best to work with what we have. And if you go to the next one. So Diane also asked me to talk about the barriers. I guess first, do you guys have any questions about the seine or our approach with that?
Yes, go ahead, Kurt.
My understanding is Don Geyer knows Spring Lake very well. He knows the intricacies. Why did this mud thing happen? Why didn't he look into it this fall when we were talking to clear out any obstructions so you wouldn't run into this problem now? Now the whole thing's on hold until spring. And I also thought he doesn't like doing open water seines.
Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, so the reason that he went into that area is because he just did it 3 years ago. He did not anticipate any obstructions. He just wasn't prepared. None of us were prepared for that, especially like that, the stake or whatever it was on the west side that was in there. Some things you just can't anticipate, although Tony and I have been talking about, even if we think it's a safe, seine area, running a chain through it in the fall if we know we're going to go after them, because that was something that we probably should have done.
That's why I'm asking why that wasn't done in the fall, why a chain wasn't run through it. Everyone knew we wanted to do a carp seine. Everyone knew it was going to be in that area because that's where they always group in Spring Lake, is that area. Why wasn't that done?
Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, it's because we thought it was free of obstructions. They do the side scanning sonar. They didn't see anything, so we did our best with what information we had available. Every time we ask a commercial fisherman to run a chain through there, it's like $2,500. So we, I mean, if the fisherman was ready and we all believed there was no obstructions, there wasn't any reason to go in and look at it. But Now we're just going to be extra cautious moving forward. So we learn as we go, and we're definitely, you know, taking notes and adjusting and getting better over time.
With what we've got on the line, trying to nail these carp, you know, potentially 17, 18, $2,700 or $2,500 is a pittance measure.
So I probably would have asked it a different way, because we typically in the business world, we have what we call a post-mortem, to go look at something and find out, okay, what are we going to do different next time so that we don't get in the situation. So I would support that, you know, in the future, just knowing that humans do some interesting things on the lake. I've had somebody tell me I ought to go put a Christmas tree in the lake to create a little bed for the crappie in front of our place, which I was remiss to do or didn't have an interest. Now you're teaching me this stuff is a common pattern, and I'll bet you there's more. So anyway, post-mortem to understand what can we do different next time. Would just be valuable to just contend, but that valuable thing to do. I'll finish the thought. The video was awesome. You know, I didn't really understand all that was involved, so that was great to see that. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'll be interested to hear what happens on Upper. I had one last question. Did you have a chance to go back out on Spring and even just see where they probably dispersed to? And let me just finish that off, so then you can answer twice. Because then, what if they congregated in another area that we believe is safe, and now I know there's a risk, but that's part of why we also bought a net ourselves, is so that we could do this. So that's part of the reason I'm asking. Do we know where they are? Is a chance for, if they congregate in another area that we believe is safe and isn't the one currently, is there still a chance we might get a winter seine on Spring? Or is there any opportunity?
Mr. Chair, so on Spring Lake, we found 2 of the tags. So Spring Lake's a little bit strange for finding the radio tags. For whatever reason, you have to be right on top of them. So it would take a really long time to find them all, but right now they're kind of scattered. We found 2 of the tags towards the north side and to the east of the Seine Hall. If they aggregate near Kurt's property, that's the other location that we can seine in, but because it's like a shallower area, they typically don't go there in the winter as much. It's really the area over by our Spring Lake Restoration Project where they were. But we're gonna keep an eye on them still. We're gonna make sure we take every opportunity we can.
Nobody else? Anything?
So Diana had asked me to talk about the carp barriers too. So the ferric barrier redesign project. So we, as you know, we had those really high bids last fall. We went from like a $40,000 estimate to a $130,000 bid. So we started looking for other contractors that might be able to bid. We tried to extend the deadline to see if we could get some better prices. And so we had a contractor that we met on site, a fabricator who can do the design work on site for much cheaper than people who wanted to do it in-house and then bring it in with a crane. So, and it's going to be closer to our original price point. We just haven't gotten an official bid yet from this company. So we're just waiting on that. But we do anticipate that because of the high flooding risk this spring that we're going to need a temporary barrier at this location anyway. So we're going to be ready with that no matter what. But the fabricator that we did meet with did say that there is a good chance that he could get it done before spring spawning. But if not, we're still going to be ready for that. And then for the bluegill stocking, just so that everybody knows, we've been talking to 10,000 Lakes Aquaculture, and they're going to provide the bluegills for stocking the Geist wetland. So we want to stock about 500 fish per acre, and we want to make sure it's a good population so that it eats those carp eggs. So that's what we're going to be doing this spring, hopefully with a little bit of help from the CAC. We've been talking to Christian Morkeberg about this and ways that the CAC can help. And that's it for carp.
So if I might, you brought up another topic on the bluegill. What about putting those in other places, other areas within the district?
Mr. Chair, we were talking about doing the Northwood barrier pond, and so we were just going to wait to see how that goes. That's the only other location that we for sure have identified that there is for sure carp spawning. So right now we're just looking at the Geist wetland. We wanted to kind of test that area out first, but if there's appetite from the board, we could definitely stock some in the Northwood wetland as well.
Should we see if there's any appetite from the board here to do another nursery and stock? Is that what would you be looking for an appetite from us? Or to see if the bluegill have an appetite for carp eggs? Just kidding, I'm trying. Wasn't very good. Go ahead, Maggie.
Mr. Chair, so when we got some of these preliminary costs from 10,000 Lakes Aquaculture, the amount that we had budgeted for would go all into Geist wetland. But if there's appetite from the board, we can spend a little bit more and also stock the Northwood wetland with bluegill.
So can I clarify, if I recall, we put in a budget of 5,000, I think, from the board's perspective, but then the Prior Lake Association gave us a $1,000 donation to also. So how much is the cost for the Geist wetland, and do we have any leftover funds for Northwood?
Mr. Chair, I guess I didn't factor in the $1,000. I kind of forgot about that. So yes, that we could use that funding to stock the Northwood barrier. Thank you. Yeah.
There you go. Go get them.
There we go.
Anybody? Kurt?
We were also, at one time, we were talking about stocking northerns to eat the little small carp that just came out of their eggs, right? What's the status of that?
Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, so there is definitely a correlation between the populations of pike and carp, but it hasn't been proven that pike are eating carp. There's also a chance that carp create a habitat that pike don't like and it moves them out. So we're having the CAC do a little bit of a research for us, which I think they're going to bring to a board meeting in the near future. So we're just going to make sure that that's a viable thing to do, that'll actually help. Because as we all know, northern also eat bluegills, so it could be counterproductive.
Thank you. Anybody else? Nope. No other questions at this point. Are we on to the next item?
Yes,
Nope,
Mr.
boat
Chair.
inspection, that's
The
right.
last item is boat inspection. So as you recall, last year you worked with Scott County to put an additional about 400 hours of boat inspections on Spring Lake. The DNR had planned on only doing 100 hours, but 600 hours each on upper and lower. We don't have zebra mussels in Spring Lake for some reason, and we'd like to keep it that way, so the board was committed to invest our energies to work with Scott County on that. So you have asked what we want to do this year, and so I have done a little bit of research to find out where we're at. Scott County would like to support us in our efforts to go forward and do boat inspections. They said that they would augment our budget to help us do that. So unlike what we did last year, that would mean that we would have the contract directly with the contractor. We would also have an obligation with the Department of Natural Resources, basically saying that we are agreeing to their regulations to do that. There are 4 inspection agencies that I just was made aware of, besides Waterfront Restoration, that do this kind of work. So we have to determine how many hours we'd like them to spend. Typically, apparently the DNR gets out as early as the end of April to start doing boat inspections, and I realize that's before the fishing opener, Manager Hennis, but people do go in. So it's a matter of pretty much getting our ducks in a row. The DNR is not committing that they're going to do the same amount of hours this year yet, but I think we can assume that they will do something close. So what I'd like to do is work with you in figuring out how many hours you would like, and then we'll put an RFP out to the 4 different organizations to see what kinds of bids we have coming back and how soon we can start.
Great. Thanks, Diane. Anybody? Kurt?
I'm pulling out this report that the inspectors gave us last fall, and just for the record, they found no boats with zebra mussel coming out of spring. They found 1 boat with mud that hadn't been cleared, I assume, if it was from the propeller or the live well or whatever, and they found 1 that had plants that were removed by hand. Now, I'm absolutely in favor of continuing to doing this project, but we need to kind of balance what are we finding versus what are we spending. So let's just keep that in the back of our minds, okay?
Anyone else? Seeing none? Thank you. Our next item on the agenda, and that is an award presentation. I'm not sure who that's for, but, so Diane, how are we going to kick this off? Who's going to start this? So yes, because we're being recorded, so if you would please go ahead and come to the microphone, and if you wouldn't mind stating your name for the record and maybe the organization you're with, that would be awesome.
Stand by me. Mr. Chair and board managers, I'm Margaret Johnson on behalf of the Minnesota Association of Watershed Administrators, here to provide an award to Diane. She has been the pillar of Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District as the district administrator for the past 5 years. She wears many hats here, including supervisor of staff, developer of budgets, planner of programs, manager of projects, leader of partners, and cultivator of community support for protection and improvement of water resources. On behalf of the Minnesota Association of Watershed Administrators, I would like to present this award as 2019 Administrator of the Year in recognition of dedication and leadership in watershed management. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. I think the only thing I heard that you didn't list on there is dealing with a very cantankerous and vocal active board, so that was missing. That's probably for next year. You'll get an award
combat
just
pay.
for board management, Diane, so.
Well, and I would like to thank my 3 colleagues. They came quite a distance to be here. And so Scott Henderson is Sauk River, and then Mark Donay, Capital Region, and then Margaret came from Middle Fork of the Crow River. So I'm so honored that you came this way and bestowed this first award on me. So thank you again.
Great, thank you, appreciate it. I did, we'll come. I'm gonna let you right now. So before we move on to the next one, Kurt just shared with me that he had another question. We're gonna take a pause here just a sec while Diane's completing this and taking a picture. Yeah, exactly. Carl, let me, Carl, are you queuing up to get ready then for the next? Perfect, and we'll just move on to that, and we'll still come back to that, Kurt, so you can ask that question, but nope, I won't now. Because our next item, I'm going to just state what it is, the Spring Lake West Sub-Watershed BMP Feasibility Study Concept Plan and Update. From Carl at EOR. This is a discussion-only item.
Mr. Chair, managers, yeah, sorry about that. It's different here now. There's no thing to plug in here anymore, so I wanted to get that up from Jamie real quick. Can I control it from here, or just kind of?
Carl, could you make sure, or pull that speaker over closer?
Yep.
Awesome, thank you, sir.
So tonight is really just a sneak peek of 2 feasibility studies that are underway, nearing completion, that were funded through the One Watershed, One Plan pilot funding program. So the first of which is the Spring Lake West feasibility study. And I will try to keep my mouth in front of the mic, but Jamie, you can switch here. Actually, go back one, sorry. The upper watershed in the kind of purple subwatersheds is the overall tributary area to Spring Lake. And the feasibility study, the area of interest that we're looking at is the yellowish watershed, Spring Lake West. That area of that subwatershed is 426 acres. From the flux modeling from 2018 data, you can see on the right, I gotta move this so I can see what I'm talking about too. Subwatershed 19, kind of off to the left side, aside from County Ditch 13, just to the right of that, is the highest contributor in terms of total phosphorus and also dissolved phosphorus for many of the other tributary areas. So even though it's a much smaller drainage area than, say, County Ditch 13, the overall drainage area, it is a high contribution, and that was shown by the, kind of the strategic monitoring the district has done over the years. So you can see those numbers highlighted on the left, 1,430 pounds per year of total, 800, so a fairly high percentage of that. 14 is in dissolved form. So that started informing us as to what sort of practices we should be thinking about in this drainage area, since a large portion of it is dissolved. Real quickly, what we've done to date, we did in fall, right before snow, site survey of ditch profiles, spot elevations, culverts, to verify information for the PC swim model and collect just base mapping information. We took a look at the most current information that had been processed, 2017 and 18 water quality data and flow, to look at those, the loading. The watershed, the PC swim or H&H model of the district, we, based on that site survey and monitoring data, we calibrated this subwatershed based on actual monitoring data. So again, kind of revisiting the PC swim model piece by piece, but felt it was necessary for the subwatershed. And then we've gone through some preliminary design considerations as well as probable costs and benefits on a number of sites in this watershed, only one of which tonight I'm going to speak to, because we have actually outreach with landowners to be conducted first. So it would be a little getting ahead, cart before the horse, if we presented the full kind of concept of ideas in this watershed until we've spoken with landowners. We have had initial outreach by Maggie through the Farmer-Led Council and feel comfortable at least telling you what we think is, regardless of the other sites, probably the highest priority site. So next slide. And this is really kind of situated at the farthest downstream end of this Spring Lake West ditch that we can get while still providing meaningful stormwater management. Jamie has the cursor pointed at the little blue finger or line. If you move to the east and north just a little bit, there's an open water body that I want to point out to the district. This is a 2004 project that the district completed. It's known as the Spring Lake West Wetland Enhancement Project. You wouldn't be able to do that type of project anymore. It's within public water, it's within wetland, it's excavation of a stormwater feature within public water. You'll be able to maintain it, but DNR has since changed its position on what you can and can't do in public waters. So that, knowing that that's there, we do know that that's still providing benefit and addressing primarily particulate form phosphorus. So again, kind of cueing us into practices that would address dissolved. And this is also, that existing feature is also serving well for sure for sediment, but should be on your maintenance radar. So jumping back to the kind of the priority BMP location, again, keeping in mind that we're targeting dissolved phosphorus, we start thinking of filtering or enhanced filtering. And so next slide. This is the concept design, which is an iron enhanced sand filter created along the south side of the ditch. Essentially, the proposed concept would be to pull flows via a pipe off of just on the east side of Marshall Road. In concert with that, there would be a diversion structure placed within the ditch that would have an overflow for extreme large events. We wouldn't want those flowing through the system. So the pipe sizing would be of such to take all your base flows and up into a certain design storm event. You're all familiar with iron enhanced sand filters. You've designed and built a couple yourself already in this watershed, Fish Point Park and Sandpoint Park, to name two of them. I won't get into the details of how that functions or anything unless you have questions. The only other thing that I'd note on this concept design is the yellow hatched area. The yellow hatched area is relocation of a filter strip. The blue area, the iron enhanced sand filter, is shown to be graded in where there is currently an obligation of the landowner through the conservation district, the Soil and Water Conservation District, to have a filter strip along that ditch. So in order to do this, there would be an extra proceeding to shift that filter strip so that obligation still remains, just in a slightly different location to address the tile, or excuse me, the tilled land runoff and provide filtering before and pre-treatment to the potential iron enhanced sand filter. So overall, real quick statistics. I mentioned initially that the overall drainage area was about 426 acres. With this location, we are able to treat 384 acres of the overall drainage area. That's about 90%. We did look at feasibility of shifting this further downstream along the ditch alignment, but then you start getting into issues of groundwater and separation from flood elevations from Spring Lake itself. So arguably, this is kind of a best fit location in terms of maximizing treatment and minimizing complications of groundwater and high water elevations on Spring Lake. You can see the estimated load reductions. OP is another, orthophosphate, another way to say dissolved, and total at 250 pounds per year. The estimated cost at this point is still quite a wide range. This is at concept level. We'll tighten that up a little bit further with the completion of the feasibility study, but there'll still be a range on it because we're not taking this to final design by any means in a feasibility study. But I would want to note what we're looking at that cost per pound removal. Those are very low numbers for kind of a life cycle cost, pounds or dollars per pound of phosphorus removed. Context, the ferric chloride system is around that 50 to 75, if I remember the last time we estimated it, dollars put into it per pound removal. Your typical rain garden might be $3,000 to $5,000 per pound removal. So these are still very small numbers in terms of your spectrum of cost-benefit ratio. Real quick, and I can open up to questions. What's next? Final report will be drafted. We will be meeting with potential project partners on other aspects of practices and BMPs that you'll see fully articulated in the final report, continuing landowner outreach. And as you can see, the next one is kind of a hint of what other practices might be. The wetland banking options that have been identified in this drainage area, and then pursuing, once the report is finalized, pursuing potential grant avenues through Bowser, the competitive Clean Water Fund, as well as other entities might be very interested in the wetland banking opportunities, either privately or publicly. And I can speak to those maybe if there's time after the meeting of what those other opportunities are, but for now I'll just leave it kind of a focus on this primary site.
Great, thanks, Carl. Gents, anybody? I mean, I know I've got questions, but anybody else? Bruce?
Yeah, Carl, looking at the awards of Bowser projects that was just released, does this, and I think I noticed some projects like this, some categories, does this project a good future candidate, you think, for one of those Bowser grants?
It definitely is. In terms of the cost benefit and those dollars per pound removal, it would rank high.
Okay, thank you.
Kurt?
Carl, when I came on in 2013, I remember asking Administrator Kinney what the problem was with Spring Lake because the water was so terrible. This is before our first alum treatment. And he says one of the main areas, besides Ditch 13, was this area west of Spring Lake coming under Marshall Road from Kruger and the county maintenance building. And yet and we're just working on this now. Do I have that straight? Do I have that timeline correct?
I presume so, if that's who you're talking about first informed you of that, yes.
Fred?
So, Carl, why the high TSS in this? I mean, it's a fairly flat area.
It's the land use.
Okay. And so how does I noticed you on one of the slides, you were removing a high percentage of the TSS. How does that design work, briefly? I mean, you wouldn't want it in the filter, obviously.
Right.
Is it the buffer design?
No, it is actually through, well, it's not well articulated on that design schematic, but there would be a pretreatment element of the design, an open water or an open 4-bay pretreatment that would require maintenance. But then also, yeah, most of what's going to be able to be pulled out is more of a particulate and it would just sit on top of the filter and wouldn't be a clogging mechanism.
Okay, thank you.
Charlie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions. First one is for Jamie. The flux model, the monitoring point, is that downstream or upstream of that pond that's in the wetland?
It is upstream of the pond.
Okay. And then go back to that slide that you just had up there. So is this on one landowner's piece of property? And has this landowner been engaged at all? Have we had conversations, or is this the one we're going to reach out to?
Mr. Chair, Manager Howley, it is one landowner. And while I don't think there has been direct, Maggie could probably fill us in because I haven't been part of the landowner contact and outreach to date.
Mr. Chair, Manager Howley, so Paul Kruger farms this property, and so he works a lot with this landowner, and this landowner has been okay with doing the filter strip in the past, and he didn't think that he would have any problem with this, and Paul Kruger didn't have any objections, but I don't know if he's reached out to him yet. But I anticipate that this will be, okay with the landowner as long as we have sufficient payment.
Okay, thank you. And so then it says on here a half acre would come out of production, reestablish the filter, the cost, and then presumably a permanent easement over this BMP to our favor. All of that cost is in your little rough estimate? It is, okay, good.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Manager Hawley, that is included compensation typical to what the district has done for other projects in compensation for easement is included in that cost estimate.
And I stepped away, Carl, I had really, I guess, probably just one question left. I stepped away for a moment, so I don't know if I missed it or not, but can you put the slide up on the model that you had and the numbers of going into spring from there? So if I'm seeing that correctly, then, bless you, total phosphorus, the 1426, right, and dissolved is 824. What is the reduction of that by this BMP? Percentage reduction? I saw 88% of the water flow going into the treatment, the BMP, but what was then the reduction of these numbers? Maybe I don't know if I missed that or...
So, Mr. Chair, that image and the numbers there were reported from preliminary 2019. That was a snapshot of the flux modeling that Jamie presented at the last board meeting. And so we were working off of averages from a 2-year period and not the 19 numbers. But if you look at it in terms of a pure percent reduction, it's not actually shown on here. We're suggesting that for the average flows for 17 and 18, we can route 80%, 85%. Actually, it was said 88% in the presentation of the volume of water through that filter. And then the large storm events during that 2-year time period would bypass. So 88% of water would be treated to roughly a 70% reduction or more. So you're talking, you know, that fraction of.
So that math, 90% of the dissolved phosphorus times another 30%
Yep.
is what's getting through.
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mr.
Bruce?
Chair, can I just address Manager Hennis's comment earlier about Mike Kinney stating that this watershed has been a problem for a long time, and it has been, but there have been things that we've done in the watershed since he mentioned that comment to you. I know that Soil and Water works a lot with the farmers, especially Paul Kruger has cover crops, they have filter strips, there's quite a few filter strips in that watershed. And also the Highway Department has done quite a few changes on their operation to address issues that we found in the past. They took the septic treatment, the wastewater treatment, they took that offline. They changed a lot of their operations for where they clean their vehicles, so there wasn't as much runoff from vehicles. They changed where they were hauling or storing their salt. And I don't know, I'm sure there's a few other things. There are quite a few things that the Highway Department did. And also the Soil and Water is working with Paul Kruger on some other options for his farming property and managing the nutrient management. So there's a lot of things that are going on in the watershed.
Well, I was just pointing out, it's been 15 years since 2004. You know, I mean, it's a long time and a lot of bad water has gotten through. And I wish we could have addressed this a while back, because it's the first thing I asked Kenny when I came on board. And that's the first answer I got, was that area. Thank you.
Bruce?
Yes, Mr. Chair, a couple of questions. And one of was dealing with land use. If the land use changes, obviously, I think the phosphorus levels are going to go down depending on the land use, but I'm assuming development would occur, better stormwater management and versus what's there today. Secondly, on this iron enhanced sand filter, what's the maintenance cost and operation cost of this system, Carl?
Mm-hmm. So in that, in a roundabout way, I'll answer your question. In that cost benefit numbers that I presented, that included annually a 5% of estimated construction cost. So depending on the range, either $20,000 to $40,000 on annual maintenance is just a very conservative number. It should not be anywhere near that. The typical design that we're targeting when we're sizing the footprint of the features and the amount of iron that we put into them, we're trying to get at least 20, if not 25 years minimum, conservatively based on the university studies that have been completed for the life expectancy of that. So they're still relatively new. I mean, there's installations 7-8 years old right now. Most, to my knowledge, have only had minor maintenance and still are performing quite well. But for the purposes of that cost-benefit assessment, we assumed a 5% of construction cost that would go into annual maintenance to be conservative or overestimating the amount of activity that would occur.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get at, that there is a maintenance cost and maybe a replacement cost, and maybe in 25 years the land turns over so that we don't have to reconstruct the iron filter again. It might be a different design at that time. So we keep that in mind, that the 25 years is a critical time frame. Thank you.
Good point. Good point. Thanks. Thanks, Carl. I think we're on to the next item, and Carl, you're up again for our lower Prior Lake subwatershed. 6 and 36, retrofit feasibility study, concept plan, and update.
So, Mr. Chair, this is the second feasibility study that's being funded by the One Watershed, One Plan money. kind of taking a step back in time, this exhibit in front of you is just a model schematic from the 2013 diagnostic study for Lower Prior Lake. And the colors that you can see, the yellow lines are subwatershed boundaries. There are some green subwatersheds, and those were identified to be treated to current standards through stormwater management practices, ponds, et cetera, within those subwatersheds, or passive through existing wetlands that they flow through. But the red areas were identified for potential retrofit opportunities. Kind of the low central one is the Fish Point Park, and why the district targeted iron enhanced sand filter for that entire drainage area. We also looked at kind of the north and west ones on smaller features. The larger of that, kind of just north of Fish Point, is Sandpoint Park, and the retrofit of the ponds, in addition of a new pond for another sand filter there. So the next largest kind of area is this subwatershed 636 complex. And so that was the target for investigation of retrofit opportunities up in the north, just north of Bowden's Bay. So next slide. Again, just real quick, what has been completed to date, a lot of survey of storm sewer and ponds, utility information requests, base mapping, reviewing of others' hydrologic models that were for, County Road 42 reconstruction and Highway 13 reconstruction, updating the delineation and the models, reviewing district monitoring information, and then getting into preliminary site investigation and location of practices and cost and benefit analysis. This is just another image of the watershed, that the 636, broken down into a little bit more detail into 7 watersheds, and I'll speak to them a little bit more specifically. But one thing, go ahead, you'll notice quite quickly is there's this one large watershed on the west side that says fully treated, and since the 2013 diagnostic study, the city reconstructed many of the roads in the Bowden's neighborhood, and this watershed is fully treated in Bowden's Park. And for those that were on the board at the time, may remember some tours, but if you look at that aerial image of Bowden's Park, the kind of sand play area and where the playground equipment and half court are, there is salvaged storm sewer pipe that is underneath that. As all the runoff comes from the neighborhoods, that's a quick detention place that some of the water kind of just seeps out and infiltrates into the ground. But to the west of that, and it's kind of covered up in trees, is the second aspect of that overall design. You have the detention in the storm sewer pipe, and then it's also filtering through this media afterwards. And then there's a channel kind of between the two that heads south to the lake. So we did not focus on this drainage area at all, seeing that, looking through and reviewing all the plans, that this now is treated, and focused on the southern and eastern portions of this overall watershed complex, the 1, 2, 3, 4 through 6 subwatersheds. So breaking these out, looking at this chart kind of from left to right, you can see the subwatershed name, the area, and I won't speak to loading, but just quite yet, but just on an area basis, quite quickly, subwatershed 3, 5, and 6 jump out just as likely targets given their size. And then also, as you work your way across, the first 3 columns in green are total phosphorus, particulate phosphorus, and dissolved phosphorus modeled to come off these watersheds. But we also know that there's existing practices in place, and that's the next 2 columns, and their efficiency that finally get to what is coming off the landscape accounting for treatment in existing practices. And if you took the total of those two columns, there again is kind of like your targeting. Again, subwatershed 6, the bottom one, 16 pounds per year. 5 is the next largest, and then 3 is the next largest in terms of loading. They all have some form of treatment in them, but there's still a lot of load coming from those subwatersheds. This is just another image real quick of the last now focused area of the feasibility study. And the red stars are where we have identified preliminary locations for stormwater practices or retrofits of existing practices. And our next step really is to reach out to MnDOT and to the city of Prior Lake and discuss those a little bit further. And that's our primary next step. But just for purposes of giving you a little bit more informed idea of where we're going, I think I'll use this slide instead of the table. The working from the west to east, or the Watershed 1, there is not a lot of opportunity. There is an existing stormwater management pond that treats that drainage area, but it's essentially, there's an equalizer pipe under the road that pond, for all intents and purposes, is at the same elevation as the lake. So there's not a lot of ability to retrofit that pond, but we still are looking at potential pretreatment features right before storm sewer discharges to that pond in that subwatershed. Same with subwatershed 2, which also is routed to that existing pond, maybe peeling off via a curb cut to a smaller rain garden or pretreatment device before it goes to that existing pond. So those have partial treatment already. Probably aren't going to prove themselves out to be the most cost-effective, just kind of giving you an idea of what we have been looking at. Watershed 3 is fairly large, has no treatment within it right now, and we want to explore with the city of Prior Lake either use of right-of-way at that intersection, or potentially even thinking into the private realm, because there is an open lot at that location. And we have preliminary ideas that we want to sit down with the city of Prior Lake on further looking at practices at that location. Subwatershed 4, there are two, it's kind of the narrow, skinny one in the middle of the area. There are two existing, there's supposed to be filtration practices behind that strip mall complex. My understanding, the last time that I've seen them, even historically, is they've never worked well. They sealed up and are just acting as shallow wetlands with cattails. So we would want to further explore the feasibility of making those function as they're supposed to. And then finally, kind of moving over to the largest one that you can see in this picture, Watershed 5, there are 3 in blue features with the stars over them, 3 existing open water ponds, NERP ponds in MnDOT right-of-way that receives the majority of the runoff is from Highway 13, but also all the runoff in the rest of the area to the west gets there as well. We know that stormwater, open water ponds, NERP ponds, what have you want to call them, are sort of poor performers. They're kind of a dated practice, so to speak. They do some good, but not as good as you can do with current technology and science. So the idea on all 3 of these, or a subset of these 3, is to retrofit those with not necessarily iron, because the concentration, at least from the one monitoring point in the subwatershed, doesn't seem to indicate that dissolved is quite as high of an issue here, but particulate. So just filter benches, but probably without the iron to save on cost of those retrofits. Finally, off the picture, another large watershed to the north, you can see slightly in kind of ghosted blue that large pond that exists at the intersection of 13 and 42, kind of down in the pit from that whole development. Our design team that was looking at this originally kind of just ruled out the ability to do anything. And I want to take a second look at that. I think there is opportunity, but I think it would probably come at too high of a cost, but I want to explore that a little further. The problem with that one is it was really built as a rate control feature first and foremost, very much secondarily water quality, and the existing outlet structure, invert elevation, is at the normal water level. And so you have no way to really retrofit a profile of filtering within that pond because you have nowhere to daylight it, at least if you're looking at the first two structures. But you could chase it down to storm sewer on the south side of the road with directional drilling. Hence, I don't think it's going to prove out to be cost effective, but you could make it work if you incorporated that scope or element into the project. So that's kind of where we're at. I know I have one more slide for a table of costs and benefits, which we can go to. The main thing I want to say here is just looking at the far right columns is that you can kind of see there again, we have a range on construction cost right now and then a range on cost benefit. And really, sub-watershed 3, the third column down at that 577 to 962, at least preliminarily, we're not as far with this project as we are with Spring Lake West. That's the one that seems to be, to me, the one that would be the one to pursue on a cost-benefit analysis. With that said, I know that we still have iron in the two potential sand filter locations, so those costs could go down. But kind of wanted to just give you a current snapshot of where we're at, and there'll be some fine-tuning on this investigation after talking with partners and likely some revision to those cost-benefit numbers as well.
Thank you, Carl. Anybody? Questions? Seeing none, thank you, Carl. Thanks for the update. So the next item on our agenda is a cost share docket. Troy, it's been a little while since we've seen you, sir. Come on up. I think you're going to share some information with us.
District. Just want to frame this matter for a second. So I met with staff last week and we covered two main items of work as it pertains to our partnership work. One is the services agreement and scope of services with the budget and work plan. And the other is the cost share program policy. After the meeting, we realized maybe it was a lot to chew off in one time, so we decided to split it up and address the docket matter, which is the policy today, and then take up the services agreement and scope of work at the next meeting. So that's why we're seeing this on this agenda. And drilling down a little, so that the docket provides the policy guidance for implementation of the district's cost share program that you have entrusted us to implement for you. We use district funds to implement the cost share program, as well as state grant funds that we bring to the table. I would say it's probably 60 to 75% is what we bring from grants that is combined and leveraged using the district's funds. So there are many significant red letters and words in your packet. I realize that. I have whittled it down to about 12 main points, some of it which is clarification, others are some substantive changes. So what I'd like to do, if it's all right, is just kind of review those high-level changes. And then if you have questions and want to drill down deeper, we can do it at your pleasure. So with that background, the changes for the 2020 docket that we're proposing, and again, these are optional. The district can choose to maintain the same docket it has currently or make these changes in full or in part. So the first is we allow a deviation from certain standards and specifications in site-specific situations where it might make sense. We do follow a fairly strict recipe book, if you will, for the design and engineering of conservation works, but sometimes deviating from them might make sense for practical purposes. The caveat to any deviation would be that it doesn't impact the expected life or the environmental benefit of said project.
Troy, can I just pause you for a sec? Are you referring to us, on each of these items that you'd like to review with us, are you referring to a specific area within the docket?
Correct.
The
Each of
manual?
these does
Can you-
refer to a specific
Could
section.
you just, to help us follow along so we
Yes,
could see
absolutely.
the areas, that I'd appreciate it. I don't know this docket quite as well as you.
Yes.
So,
So I'm going to refer to the agenda page number in the upper right.
okay,
So the first item I mentioned with regard to the deviation from specific standards and specs appears on page 12. It's paragraph E, so it's the very first change in there.
got it. Sorry, I didn't mean to,
No,
but it just, as you're introducing each one, if you could bring us along, that'd be
Absolutely.
awesome. Thanks, Troy.
No problem. Number 2 item is that it eliminates the, what we've referred to as a construction waiver, which essentially allows construction of a project to commence.
And sorry, where is the number 2?
Yep, so that's paragraph 6 on the same page.
Gotcha, thank you.
So we used to allow construction to proceed at the applicant or cooperator's risk before the application for cost share funds was approved. But we decided that we wanted to eliminate that because it's not consistent with state grant policies. In theory, we would be able to allow that if we're using local funds. But in the interest of consistency and not getting crosswise with the potential where we might apply state grant funds towards a project, we wouldn't want to undermine our abilities. So we're eliminating that. The next significant change is on the next page under payment method. Page 13, and also page 14 under the approval process. I'm sorry, page 14. Under the approval process, it clarifies what the application process is. And following that, so that's paragraph 16, and paragraph 18 is a new addition, and that clarifies what the application or contract amendment process is. So again, these aren't new policies, they're just clarifying what existing practice is. failed to notate exactly what pages my changes appear on, so I'm looking to where they fall. The next item in any event is we increased the liability for contract violations from 100% of funds received to 150% of funds received. And I'm looking to see where that exact change appears amongst all the others. So if you give me a second, I will find it. Oh, it's on the bottom of page 15, paragraph 23.
Just a quick question. Is there any significance in red versus blue?
Mr. Chair, Manager, the changes between the blue and red, the only significance is that they were made by perhaps different individuals at different times, and it's how the word processing program, MS Word, symbolizes those changes. So I might have made some changes, and then maybe another member of the staff made other changes, and they'd appear two different colors, even though they're all intended to be the same. So back to the repayment of funds for contract violations, that's increased from 100 to 150%. That is to be consistent with state grant policy. The next significant change I want to bring to your attention is on page 19.
So, Troy, could I ask you that maybe when you indicate what the changes are, indicate why?
Sure.
That 150%, we had a conversation with staff, and it's, I think it's really, it helps them understand it better.
Correct.
Thank you.
So again, that 150 increase was due to be consistent with state policy. So anytime you use state grant funds, they expect 150%. So we wanted to be consistent. The next significant change I want to point out is on page 19. It pertains to the tier structure. So we have 3 different tiers which represent different levels of financial assistance we provide. The highest level tier provides the highest amount of cost share, but also requires the highest amount of activity in return. So above and beyond what they would normally be required to do as a condition of financial assistance. What we're doing in each of the first and second tier is to drop that percentage. In other words, less percent of public financial assistance and more responsibility on the cooperator. The reason is that that is part of a long-term strategy we have to eventually wean the amount of funding that we provide to support the conservation work and really have the landowners do more and more on their own as part of a growing conservation ethic and sense of responsibility. So we continue to drop that number down. And it's sort of a balancing act. We're looking for that sweet spot where we're providing enough cost share to get change in behavior, but not paying for more than we need to towards a particular practice. And that's the reason we're dropping it. Tier 1 is dropping from 85% down to 80%. That would be the maximum amount of cost share. And Tier 2, we're dropping from 70% down to 60%. Some of the science, if you will, behind that drop is based on a survey conducted by U of M that really got at understanding what is the level of cost share that landowners would expect to get in order to participate in the program, and found that we could lower these numbers and not negatively impact participation. That's theory, so we're trying it out. So my next change is really a blanket change, and I don't want to point to a specific page because it's really throughout the rest of the document for each of the specific practices, and it's just to include some clarification as to what items are eligible for reimbursement. And that occurs multiple times for all the different practices, so therefore I wouldn't want to go through each one, but it's generally clarifying that we're paying for, if we're doing a project that involves seeding or stabilization that we would pay for site preparation, the cost of the seed, the seeding itself, maintenance, initial maintenance, and items like that. Nothing's really that substantive. There are a few specific practice changes that I want to point out that are worth noting. One deals with the conversion of land to permanent conservation cover, and that appears on page 20 of your packet. So part of the change is a change in terminology. We used to refer to annual payments for conservation cover, which is a conversion of land from a crop production setting to a more permanent cover, such as native prairie. We refer to that as an incentive. That's not consistent with state grants policy. They use the term flat rate, so we changed the term from incentive to flat rate. And we also changed the amounts that we would pay for on a per acre basis, and those are significantly dropped. Our current range, is from 150 to or 175 to $275 an acre, and that now drops to 150 to a maximum of $200 per acre. So there's a lot of changes there, but that's the essence of what you're looking at, is a drop in the price per acre. And those are annual payments over the course of the 10-year contract. Again, this change is consistent with what I had talked about earlier, and that is reducing the amount of financial assistance that we provide for the conservation work. We also, in that section, and this came at a recommendation of your staff too, which I thought was a really good point, we pay the highest amount for the first couple acres. And the idea behind that was that we wanted to really target and focus the most cost beneficial acreage, that, you know, the land that provides the greatest environmental benefit. So if we had a 20-acre field and the landowner wanted to convert that whole field to conservation cover, well, if a portion of it was along a stream or a lake shore, we would prioritize that first. So we wouldn't do the half of the land that was furthest away from that water resource, but rather we would intentionally apply the funding to convert land that's closest to the environmental feature. So that's a clarification made. And that would appear on page 22. That's the last item. It's paragraph 18, stating areas having the greatest environmental benefit within a field targeted for this practice shall be prioritized for financial assistance. The next change I want to point out is on page 26 of your packet. Right in the middle there is an addition of provision 8, and this is dealing with other practices which we assign to both innovative and non-conventional stormwater management. What we do here is we put a cap on any non-conventional stormwater project of $5,000, and in addition, the recipient of those funds would have to allow for education purposes as a component of that project. An example of this would be a driveway that a landowner or a parking lot that the landowner wishes to convert to a porous type pavement or pavers of that sort. Those can be quite costly projects, and so we thought it would be appropriate to limit or cap that amount that we would provide for such practices. The next significant one is just a few lines down. It's the addition of number 4 under stream and shoreline protection. This clarifies that the expenditure of funds will be on properties that are adjacent to a DNR or public water body. In other words, we would not fund a shoreline restoration project in a private pond or along a stormwater management feature that looks like a lake or a pond, but rather these would have to be lakes and streams that do have public access and recreational benefit. The next practice that saw some significant change is tree and shrub establishment, and I refer you to page 28. The changes in the table on the top of page 28 mirror the changes that occurred, that we made under conservation cover. Those two are very consistent. The one thing we did, however, further down in paragraph 5 and paragraph 10 is we limited the eligibility to use species that are not native. And to that end, we created an Appendix C, which lists those native trees that would be eligible under the program. And we also clarify that we would not pay for any non-native. So up to 10% of the planting could be non-native, but there would be no public cost share for that portion. We added tree and shrub establishment fairly recently, and the reason is we felt that it was a practice that reflected the pre-settlement conditions here more than even native prairie. It was deciduous hardwood forest, and also it's a more durable practice, so it's less likely to be plowed up or converted when it's 15 to 20 foot tall trees versus a prairie. So, and provides equivalent water quality protection. And also similar to the conservation cover, we add a provision that funds will be prioritized to the area of a project that has the highest environmental benefit. And finally, to wrap it up on the 12th item, this appears on page 34 of your packet. This is Appendix A, where we list special provisions of our partners that would deviate from the rest of the body of the document. And paragraph D was clarification that the district operates a rain barrel and a lake water irrigation program. And I was informed that the district won't be doing that anymore, so that's deleted. And Mr. Chair, that covers the main items that I wanted to share with you, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to try
Troy.
to.
Diane, I hadn't thought about this. Did staff have a chance to review any of this?
Mr. Chair, managers, yes, we met with Troy last week to go through the changes. One of the things that Maggie just pointed out, but it was that Longs to Lagoons program. Did we miss that in there? It was going to be added, I think.
Give me a second, and we did address it.
Okay.
I'll find it.
Because one of the thoughts I remember when I was reading this and not having a staff report or something on this, which is maybe getting to a colleague's comment, but to me, this almost was like, did we get a review on a lawyer here? Because this is in essence much of our contract, and there are a lot of different things in here, and it's very hard to digest this as a board manager, and it made it tough for me to make a decision. So that's why I decided, I thought before I open this up to my colleagues, I wanted to pop up a level and see if have you vetted this? Does this all look good from the watershed's perspective?
Yes, Mr. Chair and managers. So I'm not sure if it was clear when we started out this conversation, and as Troy indicated, we kind of separated out the contract that we do with them and this cost share docket. But the cost share docket is basically the procedure that we want the SWCD to use when they're working with any prospective landowner on any project. So it basically spells out what are the requirements of that landowner in order to get any funds that we provide in our cost share program. And so we've traditionally, ever since I've been working with the district over the last 6 years now, have met with a group of people within Scott County who are are hiring the SWCD to do these outreach programs with landowners. It's only been over the last few years that we've just been doing it separately. We haven't been meeting with our other colleagues, but it's pretty much, as I understand it, is really fine-tuning these programs so that we are leveraging the dollars that we are contributing as a local entity as much as possible. And as Troy had indicated earlier, getting the landowner to really put up more funding and to be less reliant on doing what they should be doing as a good manager of the land. So some of this is really way too detailed, and I totally agree. And I was just trying to figure out how we can do this differently next time. And I'm thinking that maybe one of the ways to do that would be to just identify those programs historically that we've had our constituents take advantage of the program, so that rather than going through all of these, a number of them we've never done in our district, just focus on those that are the ones that are most likely to be used by our landowners. That help?
I think it would, and then just knowing that prior to this making it to us, if you vet this on our behalf, even in those areas, and get supportive of those changes, then I could get behind it. Otherwise, I mean, I know another colleague of mine was saying we should park this because there's just way too many changes, and I was kind of supportive of that, but then I thought, well, let me see if there's a way to try and keep the bus moving, you know, just because I know we have some other stuff for you, Troy, that we need to dig into for you.
Correct.
So with that, I see I got a colleague ready. Bruce, why don't you go next?
Yeah, Troy, looks like an overhaul of the agreement. I wasn't here last year for the agreement, but is this a much more, I mean, we don't expect this every year, this kind of revisions, or do we?
Mr. Chair, Manager Loney, this, so this isn't necessarily agreement as much as a policy. The level of changes, I would say, is about medium. Last year was light, and the previous year was really significant. So this kind of falls somewhere in between. A lot of the changes you see are just clarification in how we operate the program. It's just adding more to be clear. And a lot of that is driven, again, by state grants. And they're just becoming more and more strict in terms of how we handle state grant funds. And we want to have a policy that is much more closely aligned with what those are, which we are in-house, but we don't have that clarified anywhere. So that's the majority of the changes. So it's not substantively different or change how we would approach much of this. And the amount of change we did that is more substantive in nature, not driven by state grant policy, really the angle is to reduce the district's participation or contribution to the program, and again, placing more of that responsibility on the landowner. So if anything, it's kind of lightening the district's portion of the program, and as a result, we'll get more conservation on the ground because of these changes for the same dollar. So that's kind of where I would point that this would be going.
Follow-up question, you list a number of organizations, this is for all of Scott County.
Correct.
What's the status of the other water organizations on this docket?
Sure. So one of the reasons that we didn't engage with Prior Lake on the early end of this is that the WMO, who is the other big partner, really pushed up their timeline for one of these changes, and some of that had to do with changes in staff and changes in the Watershed Plan Commission. So we were a couple months earlier, and so we were kind of advancing these changes much earlier in the process than we would normally. So we kind of completed that process at the same time in a normal year we would have started to engage with the district on. So that's why we're kind of separate on the changes. But in any event, as a result, the county has already adopted this. They adopted it in December. And the two other organizations that we implement this program for, one being the Vermilion River Watershed Joint Powers Organization and the other being the Lower Minnesota River Watershed District, they don't adopt the docket separately. When we enter into our conservation services agreement with them, this is adopted by reference rather than as a separate policy. And their programs, granted, are much smaller than either the watershed districts or the Scott WMOs, so it makes sense that they don't get into the weeds as much as our organizations do.
Troy, can I clarify, did the WMO then, Scott WMO, then adopt this with all of the changes that we are seeing here?
Correct.
Perfect, thank you. Anybody else? Fred, Charlie? Charlie?
Mr. Chair, well, I'll just make a comment. This will be I guess the 6th year that I've seen this. And there's about this many changes every year. We get all these big red lines and we just say, okay, they know what they're doing. And the flow chart at the back tells us when we get involved to make a decision and not. Otherwise, the SWCD and the capable staff do the right practices and they I guess, spend our money wisely in short amounts. So normally we don't have any issues with this. It looks like a big undertaking, but it's really business as usual as far as I'm concerned. So, I mean, we could redline it and have a couple little small changes, but then we have a different document than everybody else is using, and that just muddies up the waters. So, my kind of feeling on this whole thing. So.
Yep. I think it's important, so for next year, Diane, I think it's important to know that you guys had vetted this. And I think that's almost, I think when Bruce was wondering what was the direction here, any staff recommendation. So I think knowing that you had gone through this and vetted it would have also condensed the time I think that we would have spent here at the public meeting and maybe some of Troy's time as well. Right. Knowing that WMO had already signed off and approved this also I think is a very salient and important point. So just some feedback for next time.
Yep, we will do that, and thank you for going through this with us. I know it was painful for everyone, and appreciate the effort to come separately to do it.
Yeah,
and
not at all, my pleasure.
And thanks, thanks for coming, Troy. I appreciate it. I actually did have another thought. So I know that when was the last time that you have been in one of our meetings? It's been a while, hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
And I'll tell you what was behind that question is I got thinking, and I know in the next meeting we're going to get a report for what's happened in 2019, but it made me realize we haven't had any updates or progress reports throughout the year about what you've been doing for us. And I mean, it's a significant chunk of work that you do for us, good stuff.
Yes.
Troy, and I'd love to try and also make sure that sometime or with some frequency to fit all the stuff we have going on, but at some frequency would love to not just get an annual report and say now it's all done, but some progress, some progress reports.
Mr. Chair, managers, as a matter of fact, today we got the fourth quarter invoice, which indicates all the different projects they've done for us.
Yep.
And typically what staff has tried to do is update the board before you approve the paying the invoice. So the timing is, again, perfect because we'll be having Troy back at our workshop in March, and we can go through that as well. But we can certainly, I think we have been doing quarterly reports at the board meetings, but Troy hasn't been here for those.
Right. Kurt?
Mr. President, aren't we supposed to have a meeting with SWCD and the board to look at any other cost-saving efficiencies that could be captured?
We do.
Has the date been set?
Nope. As part of, I don't know that you know this, but I was going to give an update on our board retreat from some of the conversations that you, Diane, and I had with you and Jim. The board is supportive and interested in hearing more about the SWCD's activities and capabilities to see if there's more opportunities to work together with you, Troy. So I'll share that now. I was going to do it. I think you've heard it behind the scenes already. But yes, that is of interest, but it's not done yet, Kurt. So with that, then, so thanks, Troy. Maybe you don't have to leave. We have anybody want to make a motion?
So move to, for the cost share, 2020 cost share docket from SWCD, I make a motion to approve that.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Do we have a motion and a second on the floor? Yep, further conversation, Fred?
Just, I guess my only question, I'm comfortable with moving ahead on it, except it's a draft. We don't normally approve drafts. What are we approving?
Would you like to strike the word draft? Once this then gets, I guess it's draft because it's still redlined.
Mr. Chair.
And blue lined.
Mr. Chair, I would recommend that the motion include to approve the docket with the proposed changes.
Yes.
And also, Mr. Chair, if I may add one last item, there was a question from staff earlier about addressing a particular program called the Lawns to Legumes, which allows use of grant funds for projects that fall significantly below what we would otherwise fund in here. So I did add a provision early on, or a clarification early on in the changes. They appear on page 16. I skipped over because it's more clarification than it was substantive, but on the top of page 16, the change just clarifies that if a grant program allows for funding projects that fall below certain size thresholds, that those grant provisions would prevail. So in other words, if they allowed for a small project, when our grant fund, our grant normal program only allows for a bigger project, we would use those grant funds for a smaller project in those cases. So that's how it's addressed one time up front.
Thanks.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess I understand, Todd, or you will be back next
Month.
In March with a final document, perhaps?
No, I think the motion, probably with maybe an amendment or clarification to approve the policy manual or docket as presented here as this document. It'll get cleaned up and approved, but I believe that's what we're doing. Diane?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Manager Corrigan, what happened here is that when Troy came to us, he indicated that we could make any changes that we wanted to the document. And so that's why it's a draft. He wasn't coming here as a final report for you to approve. It's a draft. And if you had any changes, we would have made those and then voted on that. So that's why it's in a draft form, not in a final form yet. But once you approve it, then it will be changed into a final form. And that's what I think we do send that out to the managers after the board meeting. So you've got the final document.
Okay, thank you.
No further conversation. We have a motion on the table. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries 5-0. Thanks again, Troy.
Mr. Chair, can I just offer one comment quickly? I think it's worth noting. Earlier, you had asked a question about the amount of grant funds that were awarded to the district for the alum treatment. Was 450,000? Okay, so in addition, and you've already heard this, we were awarded the grants. So the total award from the staff team in this room is over $1 million. Now, the state awarded $13.9 million statewide. That means the parties in this room receive 7% of all the grant funds available, and that's pretty significant. So congratulations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Congratulations, Troy. Thank you.
Thank you,
Nice
Troy,
job.
for pointing that out. Great.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we are on to the next item on our agenda, and that is our Sutton Lake Wetland Remediation. Carl.
Mr. Chair, managers, there is a memorandum dated January 29th in your agenda packet. The purpose of this decision here tonight is to consider whether the district will take into consideration Mr. Sandy's request to repair the existing wetland restoration or creation project that is immediately north of the Sutton Lake Outlet project into the overall Sutton Lake Outlet project plan? And if so, which of the potential two options the board would be willing to entertain? I have met with Mr. Sandy on this issue and in concept reviewed what I had in mind for the two potential options. He has this memorandum. I have not received feedback on like, yes, I would really like this one or option 1 or 2, but at least in concept before this memo was drafted, he was supportive of either option, and I just wanted to let you know that. But basically, the catalyst to this, and as at least people that were in the field when we first embarked on the Sutton Lake Outlet project, this issue was brought to the attention of the district that beavers continually cut through the berm between the existing wetland and the channel north of the lake outlet. And the landowner has repaired this numerous times over the years, and his opinion of why this is happening is because it wasn't ever built correctly in the first place. And looking back at the original plans for that, there was supposed to be a rock outlet overflow at the north end of that wetland, and the berm itself is lower in many locations, so the water doesn't, when it has to overtop, doesn't find its intended outlet. And the flowing water has enticed beaver to kind of work their way back up into the wetland and carve a channel in the berm. So really there's just two options presented here. Both of them include using some of the material that we're taking out of the excavation areas at the outlet and using that to raise the berm within its current footprint, not going out into wetland area. And then the difference between the two options is what's the form of the outlet structure? Is it putting in a rock overflow, or is it putting in an agri-drain structure similar to what controls water levels on the County Road 1217 wetland in those series of ponds? And there's pros and cons to both. And really, I'll just point you to page 2 of the memorandum in the table under the recommendation. Option 1 is an outlet structure, the agri-drain structure. Option 2 is just having a rock overflow. So with a rock overflow, you lose the ability to really control water elevations. We're not going into a hydrologic study to look at this. We would just try to recreate and set what the original plan said is the normal water elevation. Rock would set it at that. If water comes faster to this wetland and exceeds the rock capacity, yes, it could find another way out again. So there's pros and cons there. The similarly, outlet elevation stability with a structure versus a rock overflow. The rock overflow is potentially susceptible to erosion. Even in the best installation with fabric and everything, water seems to find those little weaknesses. So it could carve a little channel to the side or something. The outlet capacity, obviously with any structure, you're picking a pipe versus just an overland flow, so there's a little bit of difference in capacity. It shouldn't be a major concern. We talk about maintenance. Rock overflow arguably could be more maintenance if there's erosion. One thing that's probably more important than anything to the landowner is that access road. And so the surface itself with an outlet structure could be uniform, earthen over the top versus a rocked surface that we're talking class 2 to 3 rock for an outlet. So that would be less desirable from a surface quality of that access road. And then finally, another consideration should obviously be the cost. And so those are our estimates at this point, with the outlet structure being the higher priced option and the rock overflow being that around a $10,000 option. And why would the district want to do this, which really isn't necessarily addressed in this memo? Continued negotiations for an easement, but maybe even more so, recognizing what the intent of that wetland originally is, which is to serve all of that tiled land to the west. The contoured land all has tiled outlets behind the tiers, and all that tile water is brought to that wetland for treatment. So if we have less storage in that wetland right now and we're not maintaining as good of a permanent pool on that, we're getting less treatment of that agricultural runoff. So to me, that's the first and foremost reason why the district should be interested in mitigating the current conditions of that outlet. Secondarily is certainly to continue to have good relationships with this landowner and being able to proceed with the overall structure. One aside, we received on Monday from DNR the essentially amended permit and the green light to go construct. So we're done with DNR at this point. So I guess the decision before the board tonight is, A, is this something that you are willing to entertain, including in the Sutton Lake Outlet project, given the efficiency of being able to lower the overall cost, bringing it into that overall project, exporting less material off site and using it for fixing the berm? And if so, then which or both would you support? Given that I haven't gotten final feedback from the landowner on which he would be open to or willing to accept.
Carl, it sounds like, and just from my looking at this thing too, you think that option one is a better way to go.
Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, I honestly don't have a strong opinion, but the outlet structure option provides the greatest flexibility for the landowner and provides the, in terms of if too much water's getting there and you want to move a board down because water's overtopping the berm somewhere else, we have that ability. You lose kind of flexibility with a fixed weir structure, rock structure. I think it's better for the landowner for access, but it does come at a higher cost.
I mean, follow-up, it looks like it's only a $4,000 or $5,000 difference. And do we have a timeline as to when we can start breaking ground?
Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, I really think at this point we're talking about fall into next winter construction. We would not want to open this site in particular before spring, even if we could get through the bidding process that quickly, just because of the forecast. And I'm also concerned of really having this site open in any potential wet weather flow. I mean, you're at the outlet of a very large watershed lake setting that would be dealing like with replacing the culverts under Highway 13 on County Ditch 13, essentially. In that condition, if you have exposed soils, there's really you can manage it to an extent, but you're always going to be sending sediment downstream in some, at least fines and stuff. So my preference from a ecological standpoint and constructability standpoint to manage erosion is to do it when you have least chance of rainfall and start and bid this for, giving the contractor until next spring to have final stabilization, but substantial completion before next spring runoff. And so at this point, we're really, in terms of like going out to bid, the sooner the better to minimize or try to have lower bids come back in, the better, so that we don't have contractors that have full schedules. But having that long-term window, it should help as well. But we want to get the easements signed. That's.
Bruce?
Mr. Chair and Carl, first of all, I'm reading in the memo here, in 2004, we did a wetland restoration project. And do we have some maintenance obligation to fix any things that are not working properly with that project? I guess that would be my first question. When did Mr. Sandy raise the concern would be another question I have. And part of me goes, I don't see a map, so I really don't know what I'm talking about, where this thing is. I have no idea in relationship to our Sutton project. So I'm kind of curious where it is and where is our obligation, and when was this mentioned that there's a problem?
Mr. Chair and Manager Loney, the first I heard of it when I was out surveying or overseeing surveying for this project, that he was having issues with this. It wasn't at that point brought up as something that the district should fix. He was pointing it out, and being the good steward of the project, had been maintaining and managing the Beaver all these years. And so I think as time went through, going through the kind of project, through the project origin and development of the outlet structure, the request really was coming in, couldn't we incorporate a fix to this during that time frame? And he reminded us again at the last discussion on easements that staff had with him out in the field, which was maybe a couple months ago or something at this point. To your point of where this is, I can't remember, were you on the fall tour, standing up on, so in this image, we were all standing up where Jamie's pointing to, and we were, yeah, and so that irregular dark shape is the existing wetland, and you can almost see on the southeast corner of that pond where there's a dark line cut through that berm, and that's one of the frequent locations, but it's been cut through in other locations where the water is spilled over that berm, given that the north end is actually the intended outlet, but it's higher in elevation based on our survey. And so you can see the contour farming to the west, and behind each of those berms is intakes for stormwater to come to this feature to be treated before getting to the ditch. The third point in terms of about district obligation and maintenance, I can't honestly speak to having read through the contract or easement agreement if the district obligated itself to maintain this, but I think it's in your best interest regardless, because you put significant amount of money towards this practice for water quality purposes, and a small additional cost to put towards this to maintain that water quality treatment, I think would be important.
One follow-up question then. You're saying then the Beavers are excavating, cutting through that wetland area into the ditch? That's what's going on there?
That is
That doesn't sound like normal beaver activity.
right. So that's what's been relayed to me by Mr. Sandy. I definitely know that, and had seen evidence of significant beaver activity over the years, but this seems more like muskrat activity to me. And so
Yeah.
who the furry little guy that's actually doing the damage is maybe less material to the fact that it has been done. And what I understand, though, is it's really the fact that first it's being eroded a bit by overflow because there's not a well-defined outlet. And then secondarily, that flow, they're using that moving water flow path, whether it's muskrat or beaver, to access the wetland.
Bruce, did you have a follow-up or?
Just a comment, I guess. This seemed like it ties into our project, and Mr. Sandy has been a very good partner in everything we've been doing out there. And it looks like that access road, that would serve him and us, I assume, the way that access road is. So doing it right would probably be the right thing to do. That's just my comment.
Charlie, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple things. One, certainly see merit in doing this and adding it into the project. I mean, one way you could do it is just option one, you bid as at alternate one, and option two, you bid as at alternate two, and we either accept one of them or neither of them, and just see what the price is. I don't know that we need to make the decision right now, but I'm supportive of it. Which option, I guess, would lean towards option one if, you know, we had to make a decision, but Bruce's point brings up, so we run around all year long and we look at people's backyards on our conservation easements. Are we running around to BMPs in our district that we're supposed to maintain? Like, did we know this was here? Did we know that we had maintenance obligations? Maybe we don't have maintenance obligations and we weren't looking at it, but number one, do we know? And number two, if we did know, we obviously aren't running around and looking at these things annually like we should be, because maybe we would have found this beaver damage and maybe it would have been scoped into the project to begin with. So it just, you know, maybe we need to look at all the BMPs in our district and make sure we have a plan for, you know, checking them out once a year or whatever. But nonetheless, I think we should add this in, and that might be an easy way just to bid it out and see what it costs.
Comment, staff, Maggie?
Mr. Chair, Manager Howley, so we do know that there are some obligations or easements out there that we are not monitoring. We add about 2 every year. There used to be like a comprehensive list, but we kind of lost it with a database loss a while back. But we really need to go back to the county recorder's office and do a review. Our district is listed underneath about 10 different names that I can find, and I don't think I found all of our obligations out there, but it's something that we're working on slowly. It just hasn't been a high priority compared to other phosphorus reduction projects, but we do add usually a couple more every year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But maybe we just hire a title company or a consultant to do all that busy work for us and just get a comprehensive list, and then we have it, rather than waiting for staff to get around to it.
I like it. Let's do that.
I was going to say, the smile told all. We didn't even need to hear. Carl, you had a further comment on this for Charlie?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that we recognized this during the planning process, and there really wasn't, except for a few things like the ferrochloride system and other large, obvious, big-ticket practices of the district maintenance, and so there is a new line item in the district's draft plan that includes kind of getting that inventory and starting to add dollars to the district's annual budget for maintenance of BMPs beyond the landowner ones that is an obligation for buffers and stuff. More of the ones that's on the district's purview to be maintaining built infrastructure that they have in place.
Thanks. So I had 2 questions down here. I thought, did we think about moving, originally because I thought they were beavers, did we think about moving the beavers, who it looked like we were able to easily repair this, and I know you can live trap them and provide a better home for them someplace else. Is that a consideration here?
Mr. Chair, I can take a stab at this. I mean, at least in part of the discussions that Diane and had with all the landowners and kind of the roundtable meetings of all Sutton Lake homeowners, the district did suggest that they were going to be committed to exploring options for beaver management, whatever that meant in terms of the context of this location.
It would seem, because it might be important, even if we do move forward with one of these, because then maybe they just move to a new location and cut a swath through there. So I'm not sure it's coming at or solving the root cause if the furry animal, whatever animal it is bound and determined to cut holes between the wetland and the ditch. So anyway, so I have that thought to plant. And the second thing I just wanted to clarify. So there is additional maintenance with option 1. Can you give me a sense for, I think it was more option 2 was almost low or no maintenance, but what is the expected maintenance? Ballparking, is this annually $5,000? Is it every 5 years, $500?
In the context of this memorandum, that maintenance was really just, would somebody have to do anything with the structure? So there would be more in what's envisioned here is there any obstruction, or is there any material that got into the structure that would prevent discharge? It's not
Okay.
physical maintenance / repair. It's more of observation, removal of potential material that got into the structure, and potentially management of the water level elevation.
Okay, thanks. So I'm comfortable, I like Charlie's approach, maybe option both of them, but I'm also curious to ensure that we maybe don't just push the problem to another location, that would be part of any solution. Otherwise, we'd be back in a year, almost guaranteed. So I'd like to see that added in. I don't know, anybody else, any thoughts, comments on?
I thought you were going to ask what the Beavers prefer, what their preference was.
You know, they're probably Canadian, Fred, so just they're friends of yours, so I wasn't going to talk about the invasion of the Canadian
Mike,
beavers.
Mr. Sandy had commented that this beaver problem has been there for a long time, and he's tried various approaches, various strategies, and none of them have worked. They keep coming back, so that's not a good sign.
So where do we go? Somebody? Bruce, you got any thoughts?
Well, I was just wondering if our previous agenda item with the docket, did that have anything with beavers in it?
No.
Oh, okay.
So what are we going to do to try and move this forward? Anybody have any thoughts? Diane? To try and move this forward, you were looking for some direction from us or support from us to move forward with this, right,
Yes.
Carl? Is that?
Yes, we'd like you to tell us which one would you like us to
Well, I kind of
pursue.
like Charlie's approach to go bid them both and include some. I would support making sure, though, that we aren't literally just doing something and then we're going to do it 20 times more down this wetland. So, to me, I wouldn't support this if I thought that problem was just going to get pushed down 20 yards and then 25 again. Then it would seem that, no, we've got to go back to find a root cause solution to the issue, which I'd be supportive of. So I don't know, is that view shared by anybody here? Charlie, any thoughts?
Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering, so now that we got the DNR kind of okay, are the final plans shelved, or you still need to polish them up? And will you be coming back to the board and say, okay, now we want to advertise for bid? Because if we're coming back with the big project and say, let's go advertise for bid, our direction tonight can just be, yeah, throw this in the project, and you guys figure out the best way to throw it in the project, how to bid it, either as alternates or not, or what your recommended solution is. And, oh, by the way, make sure it's for the entire berm and not just a little sliver of the berm.
Yeah.
So if you're not coming back, then we'd craft the motion differently.
Can I also maybe do, Carl, actually, because I know we'll have a response to that. Can I do a clarification on the timing? When do you need some direction from the board? Is it at this meeting?
Yep, so I'll answer the last question first. I would like direction at this board meeting so that if we are able to obtain the easements, that we go out as soon as possible to minimize or get the best bids that we can on the project. The sooner we bid it, the better. And to Manager Hawley's question, the board authorized 2-3 months ago letting of bids upon DNR approval of the final plans and getting the easements. So this would not necessarily need to come back to the board if you took action tonight to say, yes, please include this in however form that you want to. And I support, I think Charlie's suggestion is a good one. If the board were okay with that, then the only clarification I would have on that is if the landowner comes back, I don't think this will happen, but if the landowner comes back and is in a position of saying, I really don't like one of these options and I only want to see this option, would the board give us flexibility, given the limited cost difference compared to the overall project cost, the ability just to go with what the landowner wants?
So I want to just go back, because I'm gathering there's enough support to move this forward. I'm hearing that from my colleagues, but what about a more root cause, making sure that this isn't going to be coming back to us? Is there any support for that, or am I alone in being concerned about that?
I definitely agree. It makes sense.
Bruce?
When you say not coming back to us as
Sort
a,
of ensuring that this is a root cause solution, whatever they
Right.
come up with, that I'd like to know that, because it just, Or the muskrats from digging holes along this thing, and that we've got another, then it's because it's a standalone, it's a 30K, and it fixes the next 20 feet of the berm, and then we have another one, another 30K. So that's all what I'm thinking about, is that could be an issue. And I don't know if I'm alone in being concerned about that. I don't know this project well, so, but it's a concern of mine. Is that
Yeah, it seemed like we're doing a Band-Aid approach, maybe, for
Today,
now, for
right.
today.
that's,
And that's why I mentioned the question, what is our obligation here as, you know, part of the watershed district? We did a wetland restoration, we supported that, I assume, with funds. And we want to keep it a wetland restoration. Is there, I assuming we're not only causing damage to the road, but we're lowering the wetland elevation, or is that not correct, Carl? The wetland staying the same, or is just high water?
Mr. Chair, Manager Loney, the intent would just to be to reestablish the control elevation that is on the original plans and bolster what is apparently a berm that has either settled or was never built to plan originally. So I guess I don't see this as a Band-Aid approach. I see this as restoring the original intent of the design plans. With respect to wildlife that may still further compromise it, I kind of see that as a separate topic of beaver management, which I know there's varied opinions on whether the district should be in the business or hiring trapping, but I see that as a separate issue. I mean, barring putting in sheet piling all the way along the berm, you can't really prevent muskrat or beaver from doing the things that they do without managing them.
so maybe it was just a design with a berm that close to the ditch. Is kind of maybe one of the issues from a design perspective. Anyway, okay. Anyone else? Anyone want to make a motion? Charlie?
I'll make a motion to, what do we call this thing? I'll make a motion to include the Sandy Wetland Outlet retrofit into the Sutton Lake project.
Second.
We have a motion and second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries 5-0. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is a board retreat update. I'm going to keep this a little shorter because we're running late. I was going to talk maybe a little bit more, but real briefly, the board last year had its first retreat. We felt this is something very useful to us. We had a second one here last month, so this is our second annual retreat. We use these for visioning, goal setting, prioritization, addressing any specific issues, talking about district finances and staffing. In this last meeting, we ended up having sort of 3 priorities that became important for the board to discuss and look at moving forward. Was number 1, our upper watershed plan, and that's to try and push forward our RFP to deal with some upper watershed storage and some additional water quality treatment, holistically looking at the ferric chloride issue, and look at a course ditch 13 as part of that upper watershed plan. The second item that we really spent some time at to look at the opportunities to consolidate with the Scott WMO was a second item of interest to the board. So we had some conversations on that, and those are just proceeding. And then we dug into some financial reporting and KPIs as was the third item. There was a number of others, but those were sort of our top 3 that most of the board managers wanted to talk about. I think still coming out of this for the board, I would just also share that still it's pretty clear that our top 3 priorities for this board are, number 1, getting our recreational lakes, the 3 of 4 that are on the impaired list, off of that impaired list. So it's driving forward with our getting cleaner water, all of our BMPs that we're focused on for that, getting the carp out, and doing the alum treatments that you've heard about earlier. The second item is to move forward with the upper watershed plan, which I just mentioned. And then finally, it is number 3 is stopping the invasive species from spreading and having no new invasives in our recreational lakes, because they're a problem once they get in, sometimes costly, sometimes totally affect a lake's ability to operate. So those were just sort of the consensus and an update from the board, our second annual retreat. So the next item then is our consent agenda, and these are typically our non-controversial items that we approve en masse. I'm going to ask before we do a vote if there's any consent agenda items that anybody wanted removed off of. I got to get back at you, don't I? I owe you, Kurt. Thank you. Does anybody want anything removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I would then entertain a motion to approve our consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor say aye. Aye. That motion carries. Thank you all. Next item, so then we're on to the treasurer's report. Charlie, you're back up, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. The financial position of the district is strong, as usual. Since our last meeting, which I wasn't at, and I think you announced it, we did pay off our bonds. We had a firestorm the day the check was due to staff being gone and an illness, but we got through it. And that's paid off, so we don't have any debt on our books, which is great news for future budgeting purposes. The other thing I'd want to point out from my report is our security labeled as number 2, which we called that today. Was it today or yesterday, Diane? One of the two, because it was due.
It's due actually Valentine's Day, I believe.
Yeah, but Northland made the transaction. I believe,
Yesterday,
today.
yes.
Yesterday, yeah. So that one is now a year from now, March 22nd. But everything else looks pretty good. We're waiting for our year end from 2019, of course, which will change a number of these numbers, not significantly, but to a minor extent. So at the bottom footnote, I added that the first half levy will be coming in approximately June 19th, and the second half December 1st. So that's all I got.
Thank you. Kurt?
Charlie, I have a question. Number 2, the Safra Bank. You reinvested that? And at what rate?
Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, yes, we did. The best rate out there was a 1.65.
Oh, that's all we got, huh?
That's all we got. These rates have gone down over the last couple of years, just because of how good the economy is.
Oh, that's too bad. All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Any questions for Charlie tonight? Seeing none, then we're going to move on. Thank you, Charlie. So the next item on the agenda is manager presentations on water-related items. Anybody have any updates? Awesome. Seeing none. Oh, Kurt?
I'll bring this item up now. Who does the project's update sheet? Which one of the office people does this?
We all contribute to it?
You had a question on specific.
Yeah, that's because I want to know who did it. The first page, page 3, the bottom. Some of these items we've already addressed, and yet they're still on here. Replace ferric chloride tank. We've already talked about that. There's nothing wrong with the tank, and there's no reason for it to be replaced if it's not leaking. Yes, we did. We did talk about this. I know we did. And the other one is the driveway options. We talked about this too, that if there was a problem with the tanker getting down in there, we could do what we did 5 years ago when Commissioner Wolf was able to get the county workers right down the road to come in with chainsaws and clear out any obstructions that were in the tanker's way. So why is it still on this list?
Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis, I don't believe we decided not to replace the tank. We are going to put that off by a year because we need to do some research. We have to figure out how to get the tank out of the shed and how to modify the whole shed in order to replace it. The shed is, or the tank is, I think it was replaced in 1997, and they have a life of no more than 20 years, so it's exceeded its life expectancy. So what I remember is agreeing to replace the tank in 2021, and we would do the research this year.
So I kind of recall too that we've had some of the board conversations, whether it was at a workshop meeting, that this needs to be part of a broader review of what's happening down there, and I don't recall this being up and coming, but I think just in the light of tonight, and because this isn't an item that we need to deal with, I'd ask us to, can we revisit this at another time? Because I did not think this was getting done here shortly as a next step item.
Yeah, it's not a next step item unless it's agreed to by the board. And it hasn't been agreed to by the board, which is why I think it should be taken off until we have that discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Manager Hennis absolutely will take it off.
Yep.
Yep, I think that was just an oversight.
Thank you. So anybody else? Yep, Bruce?
Mr. Chair, I just want to comment that we have a couple CAC members here in the audience, Kim and Mary Ann. And we had our last meeting, we've done some reorganization, and we've done some major tasks, major projects, or major items that we're looking at and assigning. And I just want to point that out to the members that we have some really energized board members, and I'm looking forward to a good year. And they're doing a great job. I mean, they're going to take on some topics that need definitely some research, and hope they'll help us out tremendously, I believe. Thank you.
We especially look forward to the leadership, Kristen and Mary Ann. I think they're going to be terrific leaders on that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we're moving to the most exciting item on the agenda.
The end.
Yes. Yes, sir, it is. And I was going to try and have a little fun with this because I have something to read. But of course, it starts out, Fred is resigning as a board manager, but I was going to say that we're actually removing him for embezzlement. But no, Fred is resigning from as a board manager during the middle of this term due to moving to a home outside of the district this week. Fred has been an active member of the board manager since May of 2013 and served as board president from February 27th through December 2018, and then served as vice president from January 2019 through January 2020. As president, his major goals were to implement the 2016 Prior Lake Stormwater Management and Flood Mitigation Study recommendations and to improve water quality on Spring and Upper Prior Lakes. Fred came to the district with significant experience in stormwater permitting and sat on the Minnesota Stormwater Partnership, which helped update the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's Minnesota Stormwater Manual. The manual regulates stormwater management, including the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System and the Total Maximum Daily Load programs. The district is required to follow these regulations for reviewing construction permit compliance and when implementing water quality improvement projects. Fred also served as a co-chair of the Scott County Transportation Alliance and chair of the Transportation and Economic Development Committee of Scott County Association for Leadership and Efficiency, or SCALE. He has been a board member for the Minnesota Center for Mineral Resource Education at the University of Minnesota for 12 years. Fred retired in July of 2018 as executive director of the Aggregate and Ready Mix Association of Minnesota for nearly 15 years, or was there for nearly 15 years, and joined Edina Realty in 2019 as a land and commercial sales representative. So Fred, of course, we thank you for your service. A couple of things, though, stand out for me that I thought Diane did a nice job doing a nice write-up for you, Fred, but a couple of things sort of stood up for me. Number one, probably both as my time coming on here, you really pushed to get a government's manual revised that had been sitting, collecting dust for, I think, decades or something like that, so it sticks in my head. You were very important on that one. I'll never forget any time we ever talk about Ditch 13, sir. You have led the charge on Ditch 13 and some of the things that I know have planted seeds and we support And so thank you for that, for caring about the ditch and the impact it has, and we will carry that on, and we'll have toast to you when we talk about the ditch 13. And I think, now I can't remember why I put one other one, but actually the other one that I thought about when I was reading this, you also came on at a time that the district was not functioning as well as it could. And so you are one of the stewards who came in and helped right the ship, as I've sort of characterized before. And Mary Ann, you got some credit on that as well, and Diane came along. But Fred's been here since then. You've been one of the key players, Fred, to help bring the district and put it into some really good position here. So we thank you for your service and time, and I hope this isn't the last time that we see you, Fred. So thank you.
Thank you. So I guess I do want to thank the county board. Apparently, it's a terminal offense to move out of town, and you're asked to leave immediately, not at the end of the term. So that was a little bit of a surprise, but I do want to thank the county board for appointing me to this position for 3 terms, actually, or 2.5, whatever the math is there. I also want to thank the district partners. It's been just a pleasure to work with the district partners and the PLOC partners for sure, and always enjoy working with bright young staff. I think we have a great staff, and I think they're doing a great job, and they're a lot smarter than me most of the time, and it's been fun working with them. As you mentioned, some of the stewards that were around, including Manager Hennis and Manager Breitbeck, Manager Spitzmuller, even Bruce Thorson in the old days. So it's been a pleasure working with all of you and all of them over the years. I guess the only highlights I would add is certainly the 2014 flood was a highlight or a low light, one or the other, and we're almost through that, but it is a story to remember how long those events take. I think also the Farmer-Led Council, if we're ever going to deal with the upper watershed and ditch 13, it's going to be with the farmers, not in their information, their support, and their knowledge, frankly, on how we're going to do this well. So I will remember these years fondly and wish the district the very best in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Go ahead, Kurt.
Motion to adjourn.
Bruce, did you have anything? Just to say?
Yeah,
You can't
just-
go all the
just-
way back to
Just
years
one
in
thing I think
Shakopee now. That
I
doesn't count.
remember the most about Fred is his legislation abilities and getting the carp.
That was it.
That was the biggest thing I can remember. So
Thank
I'm
you.
always going to think of carp and Fred.
I
same
wrote
time.
I wrote carp on here, and
Is
that
it?
was when I was going, why did I put that
Oh.
on the list? So
But-
thank you, Bruce, because yes, I'm gonna. So let me just add, just to provide a little more detail to that. So yes, Fred was essential. He also testified on behalf of the district and the work that we wanted to do to change that legislation. Fred's been lobbying for a little while, knows what he does up there, so we sent him up there, and he was critical also in what you did to help move that CARP legislation forward. So thank you, Fred. Appreciate it. It's been a joy getting to know you. All right, I would then entertain a motion to
Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
one more thing on
Sorry,
Fred.
sorry, Charlie.
He was a champion on all things safety, and he brought up and pushed staff to think about safety and developing safety manual. So that's something that I remember, and it's very important, so.
Yep.
It was a pleasure working with him all these years, and he brought good insight, so. I'll second the motion for the adjournment.
Okay, we have a second. Now we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor say aye. Aye, that motion carries. Thank you, everybody.
No pictures.
I'll give